The gameplay footage you see before you is from a game called Tabula Rasa. It was closed down on March 1st, 2009, and it was a game that I enjoyed playing. It's not directly related to the subject of today's show, but it is kind of in the same ballpark. The video itself was recorded by me 8 years ago on a computer that couldn't really run the game all that well. So please excuse the fact that it's not actually in any way, shape or form near or around actual HD or a consistent frame rate. Thank you for understanding and enjoy the show. Why do MMOs have levels? Have you ever stopped to think about that? Why do so many games have those roadblocks that stop you from having fun? Why do they have so many experience bars to fill up and so many numbers to raise just so you can get to the point where you can consider that you're having fun, or at least you realize it's pointless? Why is it said about so many of these MMOs that, well, the game truly begins when you hit level 60? Well, that was back when 60 was an important level for World of Warcraft. Now we're at the 100. Some of you will say that the levels are there so the player will have a reason to come back. A reason to keep playing, because heavens know that coming back to a game because it's fun is a cosmical impossibility. Truly, the world would explode if such a game existed. After all, what do you do in an MMO apart from leveling up? That experience bar is there to motivate you. Everything is a reward for your hard work until you get the maximum level. And then, well, that's where endgame content comes in, which you will grind in the hopes that you'll get better gear that will let you just kill all those enemies on higher difficulty levels faster so you can get better gear until the next expansion comes along and increases the level cap, and you realize all the stuff you've done is mostly pointless and worthless. So pointless that you can just buy a level 90 character nowadays, because to hell with what was before. You do see a problem here, don't you? Something is defective in the mechanism. Even when the basic gameplay loop isn't awful, and the way in which you gain levels isn't an experience that just makes you feel like you've wasted your time, something is missing. A reason. One that's not there because the genre wasn't designed to have it. It wasn't meant to be just a succession of experience bars and encounters with monsters that have nothing better to do than to just stand there and wait for their demise. But that's what MMOs were turned into, because this variation became very popular and very profitable at one time. In itself, the concept doesn't have anything bad about it, but we live in a society where no one puts value on original ideas or effort, only on ideas that are proven to be successful and easy to copy. So instead of seeing an evolution of the MMO genre from the moment that Ultima Online and EverQuest proved that you could rake in the dough from it, every entity in the industry tried to copy the idea. But in the same way that if you photocopy for you snobs out there, a copy of a copy, details start to get lost. It's sort of like most of our current holidays. They are there, we celebrate them, but we really don't know why. And the reason we believe isn't actually the original one. If you want another analogy, just ask anyone why twice a year we turn our clocks forward and backwards. Either they don't know and just make up something about farming, or they realize that it's pointless. But that's what we're doing now, because that's what we've always done. With each new clone, more and more of the essence of the original is lost, until it becomes a ritual without any sort of sense. Until we accept it as being the right thing to do, because we don't know any better. It's an excuse I would have accepted a few years ago, but not now. Not when the collective knowledge of the entire human civilization is available to you in just a few seconds through the internet. It's almost ubiquitous. A lot of game genres have suffered from this effect of this loss of essence. Adventure games are a good example, the concept of puzzles dissolving into, well, basically quick-time events after a while. This happened to first-person shooter games, but to a lesser degree. The idea of shooting stuff is still there, it still can be fun, but level design, interesting weapons, these are things that basically went to hell with each passing year. Even RPGs are losing a very essential part, namely the role-playing part, the part where you role-play the game. Now everything is just shape without any substance. Everybody's rushing to make the exact same thing without actually wondering why was that thing made like that in the first place, and thus they missed the whole idea. And this is with game genres that are based entirely on mechanics, on simple design concepts. Just imagine how horrible it would be in the case of a genre that at its origins had a message to send, had an idea, had a lesson coded into its design. Sadly, you don't actually have to imagine it because it's happened, and it's probably still happening right now. The Dark Age of the MMO is a time period that started roughly about the same time as the appearance of the free-to-play MMOs. The current ones, I mean. This age started when the ideal of the genre was corrupted to the bone and transformed through twisted mockery into its opposite, from a tool that would benefit society into one that just serves to drive it deeper into ruin. The genesis of the MMO was in MUD, Multi-User Dungeon, an ancient creation dating back from the 70s, made by Roy Trubshaw and Richard Bartle, two people that put into effect an idea that was, for its time, revolutionary. A virtual world where many people could exist at the same time, sharing a common experience. And above all else, a world where you were free to be who you wanted to be, who you would want to be but couldn't in the real world. It was a place where you could experiment, in which you could grow as a person, in which you would find out who you really are, along the way making tens, maybe hundreds of friends, each of them being on the same voyage of self-discovery. Maybe the premise or the core concept seems a bit bizarre, but keep in mind when this game was made, by whom, and where. As a result of its feudal and monarchic nature, Great Britain had a very restrictive social class system. If you were born poor and your parents worked in a mine all their lives, that's where you ended up. There was no escape. No matter how much you wanted or how much you tried, the system was built to keep you there, because you've always been there. It's how it should be. After all, if there are no disadvantaged classes, then how do the wealthy ones feel superior? It's the same as it is, well, frankly, in a lot of places right now. And a big part of the problem, the thing that keeps you there, is the reinforcement of the idea that you belong there, that it's your place, that you have no way of achieving more than that. That it's pointless to even try or just have the ambition to raise yourself beyond your meager status. You start to believe that your place is here. You accept it and you resign yourself to it. You become a prisoner of your own mind. It's a system better than a whip, as Terry Pratchett would call it in the book Interesting Times, which I highly recommend to you. But in MUD, it didn't matter. In MUD, you didn't enter as your social class. You entered as you, as an individual. You entered as whoever you wanted to be. You weren't in the societal cage that reminded you day after day that you were its prisoner. In spite of what you may believe, MUD wasn't without gameplay. Maybe that being made out of text gives the impression that it's simple compared to what MMOs we have today, but I assure you it wasn't. The possibilities, the sheer freedom of action that you had in MUD and its brethren make any modern MMO seem small, constrained, even uncomfortably restricted restrictive. Why? Because back then you didn't need a graphical representation to show off the more complex elements of the game. You only needed words. Words that could be programmed to be verbs or to be objects with countless possible interactions between them. You could set your friend's backpack on fire as a joke. Can you do that in an MMO? No, because that backpack doesn't physically exist in the game. It's an element of the interface. Mud had gameplay, it had depth, and hidden in its complexity was a structure designed to change the way you think. Levels had very clear goals. They showed your degree of experience to other players and gave you the feeling that you were succeeding in accomplishing something, that you had succeeded in going beyond what you were at first, either because you were good at the game or because you made a lot of friends or because you were a positive influence on those around you. It was a meritocracy, one that allowed you to climb 12 levels, upon the end receiving as reward full administrative rights to the game, and possibly made you realize that you could go that far in the real world as well, that no matter how many obstacles were in your way, you could overcome them. It freed your mind for long enough for you to stop believing that you were a prisoner in that cage. Sure, the real world isn't as fair as Mud was, where people that intentionally tried to ruin the lives of others were removed, not promoted and voted into office. But it was a beginning. Going through those levels didn't take you 1,000 years, and it wasn't something put there to stop you from having fun until you buy the next expansion. Each level had its own identity, like an age or an era. Remember when we used to have those crappy little boats? When we used to go to Anubis just to see him, a friend of mine tells me from time to time, remembering our shared experience from Void Century Online, which is an MMO that at first seemed fun and then became progressively worse to the point of being completely horrible. At that time we were very weak as characters. We couldn't fight even the most humble boss in the game, so we just took trips to see him. That experience happened 10 years ago, and that was when and where I first met that friend, and a lot of other people I still keep in touch with after so much time. It's that kind of experience that represented each level, and at one point it ended. You had achieved the highest level possible. From there you could stay and have fun with your friends and help the newcomers, or you left. You went back to the real world, ready to apply everything you learned to improve your life, to better yourself, to stop being the level 1 character that was just trampled all over by everyone in its life. That is what the MMO was designed to do. That is the basic lesson that Trubshaw and Bartle tried to leave to the people that passed through their world. And they did it for free, because had they charged money for Mud, they wouldn't be the kind of people that made Mud in the first place. And what did the games that followed do? Well, they added more levels because, as we all know, more is better. It didn't matter that basically sabotaged the core idea of levels. They added more detailed graphics before actually having a way to make those graphics represent an interactive world. But the most heinous thing possible, the thing that led to the emergence of this dark age, was bringing the real world into the MMO. I'm not talking about games placed in the real world. I'm talking about its negative effects. You would see this a lot, especially in games that came from Asia, the free ones with virtual item shops, where you could buy power, where you could buy advantage advantages that would otherwise require a lot of hard work and time to obtain if you were just playing for pleasure without spending any real money. This led to the rebuilding of the social classes in MMOs, the rich and the poor, the barons and the plebs, the privileged and the ordinary. And the really sinister part was that this social stratification wasn't accidental. It was clearly identified and exploited by the developers of the MMOs. The point where you saw presidents of MMO operators from China, companies that raked in maybe hundreds of millions in revenue a year, bragging about the system they built, with the profitability of a system that encouraged abuse of the poor and the glorifying of the rich. A system in which one individual with money would gain power when he bought an advantage from the item mall. And because those advantages could be transferred to other people, that player would lure poorer players to his side by throwing them a bone once in a while, reminding them that their role would always be that of a lackey, serving a wealthy master. A master that, maybe from time to time, would pretend to care about the plebs. If only they would do this one favor for him. If only they would grind materials for him. If only they would involve themselves in a spat in an argument they had with another rich player, leader of a rival band. If only they would be his personal slave that answered every order with "Yes, boss," right away. They would one day also be big men in this organization. They would boss around other people, as long as they stayed on the good side of the big boss. And the main targets of the system were children. Children that weren't allowed to learn, even here, that there was a better way. The class system reborn in cyberspace. So many minds utterly ruined. Minds that could have been taught that there were other ways, that could have been freed from society's cage, but who instead were shown that there is no escaping the cage. There's no place to hide. You will always be in the cage. I remember even now my experience with the first MMO I ever played. It was a crappy piece of garbage called Call Online. A profoundly contemptible game which I recommend to no one. And to anyone that would defend it, I invite you to not have opinions about video games ever, because all you do is degrade their quality every single day. It was a completely horrible game, but hey, I was young, it was my first MMO, I thought this is what they were. I had confused that shitty design made by 2-bit hoodlums that tormented me for days to get a single level with some sort of just reward for my hard work. The hard work of playing a game. I didn't know any better. And in it I encountered the prime example of why I've ended up loathing, despising some specimens of this genre and some people that play it. A kid, from my country actually, was bragging on global chat, for which you actually had to buy a special item from the item mall, otherwise you couldn't use global chat, that he had stolen his mom's credit card and just bought himself everything. And all around them, there were tens of people gathering, saying, "Yeah, boss, can I have some of that too? Sure, boss, I'll do what you say, boss, sure." And I suddenly felt like I was about to vomit, as if I were back in the reality from which I tried to escape for just a few minutes in a video game. Even in a game, that kind of behavior was encouraged. It was rewarded. It was downright necessary to succeed. It was necessary to even have a chance. This was the peak of the Age of Darkness. I've been semi out of touch with the MMO genre for several years. I've only played things casually from time to time, not really sticking with the game for more than a few weeks. And from this perspective, that of not really playing them, I would say that this Dark Age is almost at an end. That there are enough games on the market that don't encourage treating the player base like a bunch of slaves for those who have money. But judging from the way in which even the games that don't apply directly or intentionally that sinister recipe are designed, I still don't see anyone actually remembering why that progression system was there, or how to implement it in a way that's not entirely stupid. And every time you try to criticize the way it's implemented, people will jump all over you telling you that this is how it should be, that they know better, because this is how it's always been. I would say it's still the blind leading the blind, and we're all on the edge of a cliff. If you enjoyed this show, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Or, if you thought it was horrible, then share it with your enemies and make them suffer. We shall be your weapon of vengeance. But if you liked what you saw, you could, I don't know, maybe donate, because basically YouTube is horrible at revenue, by using the link in the description, or just buy my book. It's a fantasy book about, well, a lot of stuff. I guarantee it won't suck, and if it does suck, you can find me here and complain about it.